Well, welcome to Change Now.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Is this your first time to the conference?
It is, yeah. The energy is really energizing.
Especially against this backdrop, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I don't imagine, as you are the Executive Director of Student Energy, as I said, the largest global movement, youth-led organization to help move people into the clean energy world. And I don't imagine that that was on your career plan at school. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to this moment, and then also tell us about student energy and some of the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey is, I guess, an unconventional one, but one that I use often as an example of how we can get young people who don't necessarily see themselves in the clean energy space to see themselves in the clean energy space. And my entry point for student energy was really through community. I had the privilege of growing up in different countries throughout my life, across 4 different continents, and I ended up going to university and reconnecting with a bunch of different people who I had lived with abroad before. And we kind of became this little kind of international group when I was at university, and introduced me to a youth organization, Isaac, or AZIC, as some people pronounce it, at the time, which really got me super fired up about this idea of generational change and impact through empowering young people. From there, I ended up getting connected to Student Energy, which was run by my former executive director at the time. We stayed connected, and then when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, I decided, you know what, I would never apply for a position at an organization like this if it wasn't a youth-focused organization. But because it was youth-focused, I felt like I could see myself there, and I kind of went off on a whim and decided to apply, showed up really overprepared to my interview, and ended up starting my journey with Student Energy, and stuck around for 7 years, which is a really long time for young people in a youth organization.
And of course, you talk about generation, and we know from our keynote today that we have to do this work in a generation, and there's a lot of pressure on that generation. So tell us, with Student Energy, how engaged do you find the young people in, does the clean energy sector have a good reputation? Is it even on people's radar? How much effort goes into even educating about the sector before you even engage? Or do you come across people who are ready? And yeah, tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a combination. So I think, we know that we're on the brink of a clean energy jobs boom. There's, I think, 14 million clean energy jobs predicted by the IEA, the International Energy Agency, in their net zero scenario. And so, the numbers are very clear that there will be lots and lots and lots of jobs in clean energy. For young people in our network, we're seeing really this challenge in knowing what those opportunities are and what those opportunities really look like. It could be anything, of course, from you can be a grid developer, or you can be a policy analyst, but those jobs aren't clear to young people. There's no one place that you can go to see kind of the clean energy jobs database that exists now. And I think for a lot of young people, that is really daunting because they can't see what those jobs are, or maybe they quite literally don't exist in their community or in kind of wherever they're based. And therefore, they don't know what skills they need to gain in order to be eligible for those kinds of jobs. So a lot of the time, we see young people kind of starting to gravitate towards community, where they can learn from other young people or learn from organizations working in this space to gain more awareness about what opportunities might be out there. But there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of academic institutions really adapting curriculum, not just for folks who are going into an energy-focused degree, but really embedding clean energy and climate education kind of across all disciplines, so young people can build that kind of awareness and inherent knowledge of how the system works from a young age and start to see themselves in these different roles. I think a really important thing to emphasize is that clean energy jobs are not just going to look like a job at a clean energy company. They're really going to be embedded across every sector that exists. You can be an energy educator at an educational organization. You can be working with a technology company working on decarbonizing their data centers. There's so much work to be done across the sector, and we need young people to come into those organizations and companies with those values and that knowledge of how they can make an impact on the energy side of that work.
So how are you actually managing to bring this international community together? Tell us maybe the size of the movement. Tell us where you're at and maybe where you're looking to get to in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, so our network right now, we're an active network of 50,000 young people in 130 countries. Demand from young people to get involved in our programs has been growing so much over the last few years. We had our international summit just 2 months ago in Abu Dhabi, coinciding with COP, and we had almost 5,000 applications to attend. We saw over 1,000 applications to participate in our career training program. So the demand from young people exists. It's growing rapidly. For us, it's the capacity to really meet what young people are looking for from us as one organization in this space. So we can continue to grow, but really we believe in this ecosystem of actors who can all be kind of part of creating an enabling environment for young people to gain the resources, the knowledge, the networks, the pathways to real opportunities to make a difference. So the network is large. I would say in the larger youth climate space, I think there's so much to bring there in terms of awareness of clean energy issues and really the nuances around what the clean energy transition looks like. I would argue that the youth climate movement is probably in like the millions and millions and millions. But our youth clean energy movement is a little bit smaller than that, a subset, but definitely growing. And I think as young people are connecting more with each other, like things are being shared so widely through platforms like TikTok and other platforms that young people are just using to learn about issues. There's this kind of growing awareness and interest. But it's a really daunting space for somebody who doesn't come from an energy background. And I think that's the real trick here is how can we widen that tent to bring more young people into the space to learn about energy, to basically make every young climate advocate a clean energy advocate as well.
And that is such a tough, because it's tough for us as well, because we're learning this as well. There's no playbook. You've talked a lot about, in this case, the supply, the demand of interest. What about on the other side of supply? I mean, you say you've got 50,000 young people, interested in this space, and we've got a few energy fans clean energy fans in the room. Like, how do we? And do you have a role where you try and create dialogue between those two parties, or is that something that is done somewhere else?
Yeah, we do some of that for sure. So a few of our programs are really designed to enable that pathway between young people and real organizations in the space. I'll actually shout out Okra Solar is one of our partners for our career training program. And I was super excited to see that they were participating because it felt like such a good window to also share a real world example of what this kind of intergenerational collaboration process looks like. And this kind of relationship started from one of our alumni who ended up working for Okra Solar after working at Student Energy and then wanted to kind of make that linkage, which is oftentimes how these things happen. So there is a great opportunity in the room right now, I think. But we kind of set up these projects or initiatives for young people to work on virtually with different organizations, different companies, different actors in the system. And so that's through our career training program specifically, but there's lots of other ways to commit to kind of engaging with young people in a really meaningful and kind of partnership-driven way. And that could be anything from working with us or with other organizations to create more inclusive and accessible workforce development programs so that young people can really access that entry point that often is so hard for young people to even find or kind of move into when there's 10 years of experience expected or what have you. And so organizations actually providing workforce development programs to really be that entry point for young people is a really great way to kind of start that journey. Working with young people as advisors on your board of directors, really providing young people with real agency to ensure that you're embedding youth values into your work, but you're also understanding how you can better adapt your organization to be inclusive and accepting of young people. So there's so many opportunities. Through Student Energy, we have our career training program. We have a few other programs as well, but I would say the opportunities are really endless, and it just starts with that conversation with youth organizations or with young people themselves to really understand what can I do as one organization to support your leadership in this space.
Should we ask the room, actually, who here in their organization actively works with young people? If you can raise your hand. Wow, very good. So we've got some people already doing it, but there's a lot of people that still could do with coming to an organization like you and getting advice. Because the fact that you've shown an example where Okra Solar have benefited from skills thanks to Student Energy is such a nice example of how we can really feed that talent pipeline into a very brand new sector, really. Now, because you run a global network, I'm curious to know, you'll have young people from all over the world, all walks of life. Do you see any commonalities between the regions? And then, of course, interestingly, is there anything that is very different?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, so we did something called the Global Youth Energy Outlook a couple years ago. It was we made this decision basically, you know, at every conference we go to, we see all of these new big energy reports coming out and big publications and releases, and there was nothing really around youth and energy. And so we decided, you know what, we're going to really prove to the world that young people are just as capable of kind of putting out this kind of very robust methodology and peer-reviewed process that leads to this Global Youth Energy Outlook. And so we surveyed 42,000 young people from 130 countries around the world. We engaged in all of these dialogues with youth that were led by young people, 12 young people in different regions around the world, so really kind of creating nuance around the conversations and the insights we were getting. And what we saw was a lot of consistency in what young people were calling for. Young people want a net zero transition by 2030. They are ambitious on their timelines. And if you think about it, our oldest Gen Z right now is 27 years old. So a transition by 2030, you know, they'll be 37 at that point. That's very much a world that they're living in. They also really saw government willpower as being kind of the key, the critical thing that is needed right now, along with all of these other kind of elements that need to change as part of the systems change. But government willpower needs to get to a place of ambition and follow through on ambition in order to create the enabling environment for the transition to happen. Young people consistently believe in principles around a just transition, so community-led initiatives. But where we saw distinctions was really interesting, because we did actually see that the level of concern that young people have for climate change significantly increases in regions that are typically developing economies and are being hit hardest and first by the impacts of climate change. That may not feel surprising, but I think when we think about the voices that we often hear who are the loudest in the rooms or maybe profiled the most, they don't often reflect the young people who are the deepest, that are most concerned about these issues. And I think that was a really important data point for us to consider in how we're really platforming these voices that are feeling the impacts most and are expressing the deepest amounts of concern around this crisis. I think also for a lot of young people, you see their motivations for either kind of starting an organization or accessing jobs really differentiate by their region and location as well. In a lot of locations in which we work, accessing jobs is less of a demand side problem or even skills problem, and it's actually more of a supply side problem, where the jobs don't actually exist yet. And so young people are much more driven to start their own enterprises, to start businesses. And that's something that we have kind of had to adapt to and figure out how do we support that side of our work as well, because we're not necessarily going to be able to partner with all of these governments to kind of work on how do we generate new jobs. I think other organizations are better placed to do that kind of work. So those were some of the differences that we noticed, and there's lots more, but I'm happy to share the Global Youth Energy Outlook with anyone who's interested. It has a lot of really interesting data.
Well, it's impressive to hear that this kind of report is being published. What was the response like? And did you have any hope or anticipation of what might come of it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, our hope was really that it would spur this commitment to meaningful youth engagement beyond what we were starting to see was a tendency towards superficial youth engagement, where young people often were kind of asked to come to spaces like the UN or what have you and provide these very inspirational, you know, stories or kind of messages of hope for the audience or calls to action. And while that role is really important, we were not seeing the same follow through when it came to councils or decision-making processes or the kind of closed-doored environments where young people really needed to be in the room and taken seriously as key stakeholders, as valuable partners in those processes. And so our hope was the Global Youth Energy Outlook would become a tool that young people could use to really advocate with the data and evidence that often these larger institutions look for, really advocate for what young people were asking for and wanted to see, and prove that young people are really capable of having these conversations in a really nuanced and thoughtful way. And it was successful, I think, in that we've seen definitely a big uptick in the energy space in particular. Climate, I'm not as familiar with kind of how all the spaces have kind of managed to follow through on youth engagement, but in the energy space in particular, I have noticed organizations like the IEA, IRENA, kind of other kind of big players who've really taken seriously, okay, how are we really including young people in a way that is meaningful, is not tokenistic. We're not just seeing young people as beneficiaries of decisions that we're making. We're seeing them as partners now, because if we're making plans and commitments that are for, you know, 5, 10, 20 years down the line, it makes no sense not, like it is the most practical thing you can do to work with young people to sustain that momentum, to sustain that progress, to get buy-in from the get-go. So yeah, that's been exciting to see. I think it's really been a tool for young people.
Congratulations. Is this going to be an annual thing then?
Oh, it's a big undertaking. I think,
imagine.
yeah, we'll look at every few years maybe.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're coming to the end of our time together, but there's a couple of questions I'd love to get your sense on. The first, you find a genie in a bottle. You have 3 wishes for 2024. What are they?
3 wishes. Well, I mean, for student energy, it is always about funding. So, you know, just to be real, as the executive director, I think for us, it's always how can we resource our work in a way where we can sustain impact. It's systems change work that we're doing. It takes years to really see the impacts of our work. And so resourcing is always kind of critical. I would say the second piece is really around like that follow through on meaningful youth engagement. I would love to see more young people, more advisory councils being built for different energy ministries in different countries. I would love to see young people brought in and compensated kind of for their time and energy, but brought into these kind of council processes, planning processes, young people really embedded across different levels within companies and organizations as well. So I think that follow through on commitments is something that I'm looking for as well, for sure.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, you've heard it here. Is there any partners or companies that you think, or agencies who have done a very good job in that space, or who are leading in that way?
Yeah, I mean, a really good example is Sustainable Energy for All. I started working with them 7 years ago when I started with Student Energy, and I was really pushing for mainstreaming youth across their organization. And they had leadership kind of at the time and subsequently who were very supportive of youth as part of this movement, but didn't necessarily have the like internal capacity or know how that could be done. And we worked with them kind of over a series of engagements. It did take years, but they now have a dedicated youth team. I think that's a great example of like how that mainstreaming can really look at an organization. Similarly with the Government of Canada, where I'm from as well, we worked really closely with Natural Resources Canada, which is our energy ministry. For many years, we took on different like small projects, small engagements here and there. We continued to kind of show up, knock on the door, make ourselves really annoying at COP and other spaces to get their attention. And now they have a dedicated youth advisory council. It is a recurring thing. It happens every year. They have a new sustainable jobs plan. Like there are kind of very tangible, specific ways in which we can see we've had an influence and an impact on how they are kind of following through on their commitment to youth as part of the clean energy revolution as well, which is great because those examples actually end up de-risking that for other agencies, for other organizations and governments as well. It becomes less of a scary, you know, I have to be the first one to kind of try this out. What are the risks kind of process? Like it's been done. It's a template, it's a replicable model that any organization or government can take on.
There's a good word that was coined by one of our leading voices in the UK called perseverance, which is the combination of perseverance and resilience. And it sounds like that's what you are doing in
Absolutely.
Buckets. So to finish, to steal a question from one of my favorite podcasts, Outrage and Optimism. This is a great podcast, if you don't listen to it, that always asks the same question, which is what is one thing that makes you outraged, but we're going to finish on something that leaves you filled with optimism.
Outraged. I mean, I think this sounds very typical with us being just about to kind of head into a super cycle of elections, but I think the cyclical nature of energy policy makes me really outraged. It's like a very nerdy response, but just the way in which, you know, as different election cycles happen, it does feel like a lot of the time we kind of pull back, you know, it's 3 steps forward, 4 steps back kind of thing. And so that can make me quite outraged. We can have lots of conversations about that. And then optimism, I mean, young people and energy, and I think willingness to see young people as more, that makes me optimistic.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all of the work that you do. I would like to thank our audience for taking and sharing your very valuable time with us today. And Helen will be around the rest of the day, so please do come and find her at the end of this session. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much, and enjoy day 3 of ChangeNOW 2024. Thank you.
Thank you.